Hello, my name is Janell Woodward and I work with the Nevada Division of Emergency Management in the Mitigation section. I want to talk to you a little bit today about building resilience through funding, and specifically funding that is available through the Division of Emergency Management. The Bric Program, which stands for Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities, is a brand new program that had its first year just recently. We sent in our applications on the end of January. And the purpose of this program is to make federal funds available to the states and territories for pre-disaster mitigation activities. Who is eligible for BRIC funding? Well, for applicants, those are all 50 states, U.S. territories, federally recognized Indian tribal governments, and the District of Columbia. As far as sub-applicants, local governments, Indian tribal governments, state agencies, and tribal agencies are able to apply for BRIC funding. A small sampling of the requirements include a FEMA-approved hazard mitigation plan that must be approved by the date of the application deadline, as well as the time of obligated funding from FEMA. As well, applicants and sub-applicants must provide a benefit cost analysis, or BCA, or other documentation that validates cost effectiveness. This other documentation would refer to projects that have predetermined calculations, and therefore no BCA would be needed for that. As well, applicants and sub-applicants have to abide by the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, and related instructions and directives from DHS and FEMA. I tell all of the sub-applicants that the NOFO, or Notice of Funding Opportunity, is their best friend. This provides a full list of all requirements for the grant, which can change each year. So be sure to be well aware of what's included in the NOFO. Generally, FEMA pays up to 75% of the total cost of a project, leaving a 25% cost share that is up to the sub-applicant to cover. FEMA will pay up to 90% for small and impoverished communities. In Nevada, that only includes Caliente, and in that case, there's just a 10% cost share. If FEMA pays up to 100% for management costs, and that's 10% of all projects submitted for the applicant or state, and then 5% for all sub-applicants. And for the FMA, or Flood Management Assistance Program, FEMA pays up to 90% for repetitive loss properties and up to 100% for severe repetitive loss properties. For the federal fiscal year 2020, the BRIC priorities included incentivizing public infrastructure projects, projects that mitigate risk to one or more lifelines, projects that incorporate nature-based solutions, and then increasing funding to applicants that facilitate the adoption of enforcement of the latest published editions of building code. A lifeline enables the continuous operation of critical government and business functions and is essential to human health and safety or economic security. FEMA included these community lifelines starting this year in all parts of the emergency management program, but all grants through FEMA have to include one or more links to one or more lifelines. These include safety and security, food, water, shelter, health and medical, energy, communications, transportation, and finally hazardous materials. The BRIC funding limits for this past year included a set aside of $600,000 in federal cost share per state, territory, and tribe. Within that $600,000 set aside, up to $300,000 may be used for planning or planning-related activities. And the remaining project applications are 100% competitive nationally. This past year, this included no limit on a number of sub-applications, up to $50 million per sub-application. Those are some pretty big projects that are available to be applied for. So getting together with other agencies and doing some type of a project either between communities or between states is a really good way to meet that $50 million limit on there. Examples of the capability and capacity building activities include the building codes, partnerships with other agencies, project scoping, which is set aside funding, which is funding that allows you to work out what your project needs to do. So if you're not really sure which is the best project to do, you want a project scoping grant so that you can figure that out. And then finally, planning is included in that. For the Flood Mitigation Assistance Program, or FMA, this was created to reduce or eliminate the risk of repetitive flood damage to buildings that are insured by the National Flood Insurance Program. So you can see that FMA is tied directly to the NFIP. Eligibility requirements for FMA are very similar to what BRIC is, in that you have to have a FEMA approved local or tribal hazard mitigation plan by the application deadline and at the time of obligated funding. Sub-applicants need to participate in the NFIP and not be on probation or be suspended. And finally, all structures included in the project sub-applications have to be insured under the NFIP before, during, and after. Funding priorities for FMA this past year included project scoping, which was previously called advance assistance, community flood mitigation projects, technical assistance, flood hazard mitigation planning, and finally individual flood mitigation projects. These can change each year, so since we don't have the 2021 NOFO out yet, that won't come out until August. I can only tell you what we had this past year. And then funding limits are also a little bit similar to the BRIC program. $600,000 for project scoping. That's pretty good, since with BRIC it was much less. And in the past, for PDM or pre-disaster mitigation program was only $200,000. $30 million for community flood mitigation projects per sub-application. Both of those are new for FY 2020. And then you can see the rest with the technical assistance, the mitigation planning for states and local plans that can use some FMA funding, and then management costs, 10% for the recipient or state, and then 5% for subrecipients. FEMA developed a new program called Fema Go this last year, which was much easier than the former e-grant system that was pretty complicated. You can see that you can go to go.fema.go and create an account to be able to get into Fema Go. There are some other issues with getting your local agency to give you permissions, as well as the state DEM giving permissions. But for any technical help needed, you can call them at their help desk or email their help desk. And this is a picture of what it looks like for the FEMA grants outcome, or Fema Go. You'll create your account and log in there. For Hmgp and Hmgp post-fire, we're talking about Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. These are post-disaster funds. Hmgp is generated post-disaster after a presidentially declared disaster. Nevada is an enhanced state, so this results in 5% additional funding for a total of 20% of the federal portion of the disaster. For Hmgp post-fire, this is triggered by having an FMAG after or with a fire. FMAG stands for Fire Management Assistant Grant. And these FMAGs that are declared with a wildfire generate mitigation grant funding. And we're notified in July of this funding and where we stand at the July timeframe, which is updated in October, and then applications are due March 31st. And remember, the federal fiscal year is October 1st through September 30th. So after that July timeframe where we're first notified, there's still time for additional fires that might happen. So that's not our full funding typically in July. The priority for Hmgp post-fire is the county and the area where the fire occurred. And this is for a post-fire or post-fire flood project. Once we first go to these counties and the areas where the fires have happened, there's typically funding left over. And so if that's not fully spent by the fire or flood people, ultimately the funding is available statewide for any hazard. The Disaster Recovery Reform Act, or DRRA, added a bunch of additional opportunities for fire and post-fire flood projects. These grants are managed by DEM Mitigation Section and are an allocation to the state. Funding is based on an average of FMAG funding for the entire country. So imagine California with their 24 FMAGs from last year. Each state receives funding based on how many FMAGs for the federal fiscal year in their state. Additional funding is available for our enhanced status as well. Funding for Hmgp post-fire has really increased each year since 2018 when they brought this program back. For 2021 fire season, which is the current season, we've already had one fire, and each FMAG results in $778,778 multiplied by how many FMAGs there are for the year. So we're off to a good start in funding that is set aside for Nevada. And this is an incredible funding opportunity for our state to get many different projects done. Additional activities from the DRRA Section 1205 include reseeding ground cover, mulching, constructing straw, rock, or log dams, placing logs and other erosion barriers, installing debris traps to modify the road and drainage mechanisms, modifying or removing culverts to allow drainage to flow freely, including also adding drainage dips, planting grass to prevent the spread of noxious weeds, installing warning signs, establishing defensible space, reducing hazardous fuels, removing standing burned trees, and replacing water systems that might have been burned and have caused contamination. This is not all that's available to be done, but these are just some of the newer things that are allowed because of DRRA. And that ends my presentation. I appreciate you spending your time and listening to this presentation. For questions, you can contact Erin Warnock, and myself for any help with this program to see if funding is available, or if you just have questions about it. Erin can help you from the flood side of things, and then she would turn you over to me where we would put together your application and get that in. So thank you very much.